So a few months back, I made a video about Frontlines, Fuel of War, a game that I never played until I made the video. As a big fan of the old Battlefield games, especially because I spent the entire summer of 2007 playing 1942 and Vietnam, I have a fondness for that style of game. And who didn't love Battlefield 1943 from the Xbox Live Arcade? The real big downside to me from Frontlines was that it was clearly a multiplayer-focused game, and multiplayer games tend to die out at no fault of the player. They don't really have much longevity once the player base dies out. If they had added in bots just like the old Battlefield games that they took inspiration from, then someone like me could still experience what the game had to offer years after their release. In my Frontlines video, I talked about the development history and how the game came to be, and how it failed to find commercial success despite being ahead of its time for large-scale, vehicle-based, modern first-person shooters. People said this was Battlefield 3 before Battlefield 3. Frontlines was developed by Kaos Studios and published by THQ in early 2008, and at the time, THQ was stretching themselves thin by acquiring developers, licensing franchises, and cranking out so many games that it made our head spin. Despite Frontlines being a relative failure, Kaos Studios was seen by THQ leadership as a developer with great potential. So THQ set the team loose on their next project, Homefront. Slated for a 2010 release, the game would be a new IP to compete with the likes of Call of Duty and Battlefield. However, by 2010, THQ was grappling with the consequences of many poor decisions and found themselves needing to bet the house on Homefront's success. For THQ, Homefront needed to become the next great first-person shooter IP and turn the awful financial position around. Homefront had a promising premise, a massive marketing budget, and ample ambition. Despite selling well, Homefront failed to meet expectations and was ultimately a financial disaster for the developer and for the publisher. So I can remember the marketing for Homefront, and I especially remember my older brother being very excited for it to come out, but I don't remember ever playing it or if I ever even watched him play it. And thanks to this YouTube channel, I've been on a kick lately of playing Xbox 360 era games that I might have missed out on when they first came out. And I've been really enjoying making these videos to reflect on my experiences while playing the games. So when I spotted a copy of Homefront at my local game store for only $5, I just grabbed it immediately. And when I put up a community poll for my subscribers to pick the next game that I would make a video on, they picked Homefront, and I'm really glad that they did. Homefront is the game that I've probably enjoyed the most playing for my YouTube channel, so much so that I initially went into playing Homefront with the idea that I would make a simple comedic abridged playthrough for the single player, but after I experienced the game and I did a little bit of research as I started writing for this script, I realized that I just had to give it a full retrospective treatment and really dive into a lot of the details about Homefront. It's just a fascinating story to me. I'm not saying the game is a masterpiece or like a hidden gem or anything else like that, and I know that the internet loves nuanced opinions.
Pause not.
But from the context of playing this for the first time over 13 years after its release, in an era where modern microtransaction-filled live service games, remakes, remasters, sequels, and free-to-play slop is just shoveled at us with 6 or 7 year gaps between major releases, I gotta say, I really enjoyed my short time with Homefront, and it felt like a breath of fresh air to reset me back to why I love video games. So I don't know how long this video is gonna be, but in this video, we're going to explore how Homefront came into existence and its importance for its developer Kaos Studios and for its publisher THQ. We'll look at the development challenges and the over-the-top marketing campaigns, and then we'll dive into the setting, the story, and the multiplayer details. There is going to be an abridged playthrough of the story campaign in this video so that you get the full picture of what the story campaign really was about. And finally, we'll discuss how Homefront's poor reception and its low sales led to the closure of Kaos Studios and helped to contribute to the financial downfall of one of the largest and most beloved game publishers of the era. But first, let's take it back a bit by answering a few important questions. Who was Kaos Studios? What types of games did they like to make? And how did they end up as the developers that THQ hoped would save their sinking ship? Kaos Studios formed in 2006 after the team's previous studio, Trauma Studios, was acquired by EA Dice in 2005, then shut down a year later. And can anybody name a better combo than EA buying up a promising studio and turning it to shit? During their stint as Trauma Studios, the team worked to support Battlefield 2, an amazing opportunity for this team as they had previously made a name for themselves by creating the Desert Combat mod for Battlefield 1942. The mod took the large-scale battle elements of Battlefield 1942 and reskinned them into a Gulf War-themed setting, and there weren't very many modern military shooters at the time. After Trauma Studios was closed up by the evil megacorporation Suits, the team took their experience with large-scale, vehicle-based combat to other publishers and found a suitor with THQ, forming Kaos Studios in the process. THQ would become the publishers for the team's first full release game, the previously mentioned Frontlines: Fuel of War in 2008. Frontlines received mixed reviews when it released, and it was plagued with development issues. One major issue was the difficulty in programming for the PlayStation 3's confusing as all hell cell architecture. Only a few weeks before Frontlines was set to release, Kaos and THQ canceled the PlayStation 3 release. And then the game went on to sell only about 300,000 units in the first 3 months, deeming it a commercial failure. So while Frontlines didn't have the success that Kaos, THQ, or gamers were looking for, THQ saw great potential in Kaos Studios' abilities. Notably, they saw the team's ability to deliver on large-scale multiplayer combat, a competitive advantage in the now exploding online gaming market. At the time, if we wanted to play a large-scale multiplayer shooter on console, our options were Operation Flashpoint, Battlefield Bad Company, and a handful of PC exclusives out there like Battlefield 2 and Arma. The team at Kaos had shown that they could deliver a high-quality, full-fledged game given the resources. They had proven to themselves and to THQ that they could create a narrative-driven setting for an epic multiplayer action shooter. With this experience under their belts, they set off to perfect and showcase their storytelling abilities and improve on their multiplayer formula by incorporating some more modern gameplay mechanics. And thus, Homefront was born. Now, while Homefront was being developed into a game that would showcase the team's capabilities and deliver a much-needed commercial success for Kaos Studios, executives over at THQ were competing in a speedrunning contest to see who could be the fastest to make the company go bankrupt. THQ made its name on games licensed for popular IPs. They released countless games for WWE, SpongeBob, Rocket Power, and too many IPs to count really. But the high licensing costs to use these IPs greatly reduced THQ's profitability. As the licensing costs grew and fan interest began shifting to competitors' original IPs such as Call of Duty, Gears of War, Battlefield, and Halo, THQ's reliance on external IP slowed their progress toward internally developing their own successful IP. In an attempt to catch up and quickly get new IPs off the ground, THQ went on an absolute blitz of acquiring development studios during the mid-2000s. Early on in the decade, Red Faction and later Saints Row developer Volition, MX vs. ATV developer Rainbow Studios, and SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom developer Heavy Iron Studios were all acquired. In 2004, THQ acquired Relic Entertainment. Known for their work on Warhammer 40k Dawn of War, THQ would help them publish their new IP, Company of Heroes. In 2006, Vigil Games was also acquired and tasked with the development of the new Darksiders IP. And the subject of this video, Kaos Studios, was acquired in 2006. This rapid acquisition strategy resulted in multiple IPs under development and spread THQ resources very thin. Rather than adopting a centralized approach like their competitors, THQ allowed each studio to operate independently. Each studio had their own QA, marketing, and game engines. Because they each had their own technology underlying their games, THQ was unable to shift developers between studios or to take advantage of a single training system for new staff. And without a centralized marketing team, marketing campaigns overlap and budgets inflated. All of these reasons drove THQ's operating costs to unsustainable levels. In 2007, THQ's earning reports showed that they had over $1 billion in gross revenues, but they only had $68 million in net profits. It was clear that they needed a homegrown blockbuster. In the run-up to 2009's Red Faction Guerrilla, the open-world reboot for the series, THQ invested heavily into marketing the game, and although reception was good and sales were relatively okay, the number of units that did sell did not meet the necessary return on investment for the large marketing budget. THQ would follow this up the next year with another strong marketing push for Vigil Games' first entry in the Darksiders series, but it would meet a similar fate as Red Faction Guerrilla. For the fiscal year of 2009, THQ reported a $431 million net loss, with about $40 million of that amount being expenses related to restructuring, including canceling projects, laying off staff, and shifting resources around. For the fiscal year 2010, THQ would report a profit of only about $500,000. THQ was sinking faster than Ubisoft is sinking in 2024. With their backs against the wall, THQ threw all that they had at Homefront with the hope that it would become the next great IP and compete alongside Call of Duty and Battlefield in the exploding market for modern military first-person shooters. Homefront was slated for a holiday season 2010 release, and someone over at THQ must have been really feeling themselves if they thought Homefront was going to be able to compete with Black Ops and Bad Company 2. Call of Duty Black Ops sold about 5.5 million copies on its first day, and another 18 million in the next 3 months, while Bad Company was able to sell 12 million in the first 3 months. And that's not even mentioning the other amazing games that were released in the fall of 2010. 2010 was just an incredible year for gaming. So how did they plan to compete with all those games, other than delaying Homefront to 2011, which they also did? Well, they didn't learn from their last two mistakes, so they decided to throw $50 million into marketing Homefront. THQ was determined to make sure that Homefront was seen by as many eyes as possible. The marketing campaign was heavily driven by Danny Bilson, THQ's executive vice president of global production and marketing. Bilson believed that Homefront would become THQ's next massive hit.
It's our biggest project ever in the history of the company. It's not an invasion game. It's about an occupied country. They control San Francisco.
Bilson also had a lot of contributions for Homefront, but we'll come back to his involvement later. And I just gotta say, I remember their marketing campaigns. I actually thought that they were really cool because they all tied into the setting for the game. Homefront is set in a near future dystopian America where an empowered North Korean army has invaded and now occupies much of the western United States. Living under martial law, American resistance groups are engaging in guerrilla operations to try to fight back against the oppressive Korean rule. All the while, civilians are just scraping by for survival under the harsh and oppressive rule of the occupying forces. For the marketing, they really wanted to immerse potential players into the dystopian world of Homefront. To do so, they created a resistance radio website to listen into broadcasts and news reports from within the game's world. They also created fake news reports and social media posts announcing that North Korea had attacked or declared war on the US. People who didn't understand that these were ads for a game were really confused and started panicking like the world was gonna end. At E3 2010, they had some of the largest billboards on display. They had Korean propaganda-themed food trucks, and they even had a group dressed as Korean soldiers walking the floor of the convention hall. And most famously, they held an event in San Francisco where they released 10,000 red balloons over the city. The balloons were meant to represent Korean paratroopers descending on the city. And this dumbass idea just pissed off the citizens of San Francisco. And for pretty good reason. I mean, if you didn't know that this was for a game, you just see a bunch of red balloons floating in the summer sky and think, panic bells, red alert, there's something here from somewhere else. And most of those balloons ended up landing in the bay and were environmental hazards for the wildlife. Also, who the fuck thinks releasing balloons is a fun idea? That's the kind of thing you'd expect out of a bunch of arrogant nematode marketers. THQ tried to play the whole thing off by saying that the balloons were biodegradable and perfectly safe, but come on, how many years does it take for something to biodegrade? Until then, it's a hazard. They also had postcards that were attached to the balloons to help with marketing the game, so it was basically just organized littering for their own enjoyment. The city later determined that they'd broken some fish and wildlife laws, and they were fined $7,000 for the stunt. So while the marketing team was adopting the all press is good press mentality, the team over at Kaos Studios experienced hurdle after hurdle with actually creating the game that they were trying to sell. Team members reported that the production really only took about 14 months of the almost 2 years that they had in development. And just as the studio was starting to ramp up on full production of Homefront, Frank DeLise, the last remaining founder of Trauma and Kaos Studios, departed. His exit in 2010 left a significant gap in leadership and led to a very low morale and instability within the studio. But as the scale of Homefront grew, it began to take on a whole new look. It was no longer an ambitious first-person shooter from a small team at Kaos Studios that had worked on Frontlines. Now it was a large-scale, expansive project with high expectations from THQ. To help make sure that the development went smoothly, the hiring team brought in many senior developers. But these senior developers had more experience than the leadership above them, leading to even more conflict within the team. And the salaries for these more senior industry professionals further inflated the cost of development. As Homefront grew in scale, so did Kaos Studios, from around 40 employees in 2008 to almost 180 by the time of release. And the lack of senior leaders to help manage this growth contributed to even more management challenges as the team worked toward their fall 2010 release date. But the staff on the team fluctuated constantly as many staff members could no longer take the awful crunch and overwork culture that had begun to develop at the studio. Some former employees alleged that they were required to work 12-hour days for 6 days a week, and some members of the team did this for 14 months straight. To add on to the already rocky development, Danny Bilson from THQ took on Homefront as his pet project. Bilson, a former Hollywood writer and producer, brought his experience with storytelling, creative production, and marketing to Kaos Studios. Bilson was critical in securing and leading the marketing efforts for Homefront, and many employees reported that Bilson would frequently stand up for Kaos Studios anytime THQ would question their ability to deliver the hit that THQ needed. But not all of Bilson's contributions were seen as helpful for the development of Homefront. Former staff later commented that Bilson's overly hands-on involvement often led to lots of poorly communicated changes that set the project back. Bilson, being an executive from the filmmaking industry, was very inexperienced with providing feedback on game mechanics and game development, and he would often give vague or non-actionable feedback. After about a year of development, the team's first prototype, which was shown at E3 of 2009, was scrapped after Bilson pressured the team into some drastic changes. Bilson was also incredibly against using China as the main antagonist, as the team had originally intended. Bilson, who was probably correct in thinking this, feared that he and other THQ executives would be banned from entering China if their game cast a negative light on the Chinese government and its military. He also feared that it would harm THQ's abilities to do business in China, the world's largest gaming market. The team would eventually land on casting North Korea in the role after they considered an ambiguous unified alliance of East Asian countries. All of these changes, gaps in leadership, and turnover contributed to production delays and eventually led THQ and Kaos Studios to delay the game into 2011. Announced during THQ's Q2 earnings call, investors and the public were informed that Homefront would be delayed to March 15, 2011, to allow for additional polish to meet THQ's high standards. To help build a more believable and engaging story, the team at Kaos Studios brought on John Milius as a story consultant. Known for his novels Red Dawn and Apocalypse Now and their accompanying films, Milius provided input on the themes, tone, and helped to shape the dystopian setting of a foreign power occupying the United States. Homefront is set in a fictional, near-future world where North Korean leader Kim Jong-un unites North and South Korea. He does so by claiming that it will help reunite Korean families, industries, and economies. The war in the Middle East continues to rage on with no end in sight, and the destruction of many oil wells and pipelines ends up crippling the world's oil supply. Prices at American gas stations rise to over $20 a gallon, and as the global financial crisis spirals, the value of the American dollar plummets and civil unrest breaks out across much of the US. In 2017, US forces retreat from their forward positions in East Asian countries, and a year later, the Greater Korean Republic forces Japan to join their federation. In 2022, the United States president orders a freeze on all bank withdrawals as the financial system and civil unrest reach an absolute breaking point. Later that same year, an Asian bird flu epidemic sweeps the nation, killing 6 million Americans. Mexico closes its borders to American refugees. The Korean Federation continues its expansion by annexing the southern Asian countries in 2024. Korea then launches a communication satellite that it claims will help spread a message of peace. But of course, they use it to launch an EMP attack on the United States, crippling the infrastructure and leaving the United States military forces scattered and scrambling. The Korean Federation uses the opportunity to seize Hawaii before then invading San Francisco and eventually the Midwest. Now, Korea occupies the western states and American civilians live under martial law. So I think that the setting and the backstory is incredibly engaging. I know that this is a pretty divisive setup, with a lot of people liking it while others think that it's just far too unbelievable for a nation as small as North Korea to accomplish so many things, especially invading the United States. But it's all about suspension of disbelief. I just happen to be more willing to let the story be told to me than others might be. When the game finally launched on March 15th of 2011, players were able to dive into the campaign and see this world that the developers and marketers were hyping up. But does it live up to the expectations? Let's dive in and see for ourselves. The game starts with us being awoken by Korean People's Army soldiers banging on our door. They bust it down to handcuff us and haul us onto a bus. Apparently, our name is Jacobs, and we are a former pilot for the US military. A woman and her child are also loaded onto the bus. Outside the bus, we can see that the KPA soldiers are rounding up and beating civilians on the street. Another man on the bus says that they're rounding up all the pilots in the area. Out on the street, a man gets shot with his blood splattering onto the window.
Don't look! Please don't look!
And as we're still absorbing that moment, the little boy running up to his parents' bodies while screaming incoherently, it just gets me, man. Then we see more civilians being rounded up and scanned in through a checkpoint that's guarded by a sentry turret. Probably the worst part about this whole section is that the other guy won't shut the hell up telling us what is happening. Like, we don't need this dude telling us that these people are being rounded up and sent to labor camps and they're likely just gonna die, or that the bodies disappear quickly and there's likely mass graves around. Like, dude, just shut the hell up and let us grasp the awful carnage that's happening outside that we can do nothing to stop. Then he says that we gotta stick together when we get to where we're going, but before he can finish his sentence, a truck rams the bus. Everyone inside the bus goes rolling all around and snaps their necks, backs, legs, and arms, except for the main character. I guess we get plot armor. And get used to it, this happens so often that the characters actually make a joke about it. Connor tells us to grab a gun and we meet Rihanna as we exit the bus, and the thing I bet most people remember from Homefront is right here, right off the bat, right as you get control of your character. Product placement is everywhere.
You guys kept talking about White Castle last night so much, it made me start to crave it too.
So we head through the White Castle to escape the KPA, and we get the first instance where the game puts a door in your way and you have to wait for the NPCs to open it. After battling through some KPA troops, every player realizes at this moment that, yep, this is just the Call of Duty clone. Oh well, right? Aside from Makarov shooting up the airport, Call of Duty has never taken the creative risks that Homefront has already shown in the first 4 minutes of its story, so let's just give it a shot. We come into this building and even more product placement.
It's like people only do things because they get paid. And that's just really sad.
This time it's for Full Throttle energy drinks, and this really took me back. I used to drink a Full Throttle like every other day when I was in high school. As we hold out in the gas station, a transport shows up that we blow up and it destroys the gas pumps. Then we make our way into the suburbs and we head into a treehouse to provide some cover for Connor and Rihanna as they head over the fence. A rocket gets fired at the treehouse and our plot armor saves us as we fall down. So we fight the KPA troops among the wreckage of this crashed plane. And this is where I think that the world design is pretty great. The sight of a crashed airliner in the middle of an American suburb is a great emotional framing to get you invested. Making our way through the town, we get not one, not two, but 3 moments of waiting for the NPCs to kick open doors within 30 seconds of each other. Then we arrive at the civilian neighborhood, and the team argues over whether we should have even come to the neighborhood and disturbed the civilians' peace. The leader of the group, Boone, explains that the plan is to steal some fuel from the KPA and deliver it to the US Army gathering in San Francisco, and they need us to pilot something for the plan. A KPA APC rolls down the street and starts gunning down the civilians. We make our way inside the nearby house, but not before Boone has to kick open a door. A mother carrying her baby takes cover inside the house, and as we fight off the enemies, the baby crying rings out louder than the gunfire. I don't think that's how this works, but since I've just only recently survived the newborn phase, I gotta say this was pretty unsettling. They didn't go far enough as to have the mom and baby die. In some interviews, the developers tried to play this off by saying that the KPA was more focused on taking out the resistance members and not worried about the mother and child. Oh, whatever. The brutality and collateral damage of this war on civilians on American soil has already been set up and established without the need to kill a mother and her child. So you run into this house, escorting the mother and child, and Rihanna kicks open another door. We meet up with Hopper, who gives us a targeting system for this crazy drone named Goliath. So we take the targeter and we target these enemies, and the drone fires rockets to blow them up. We do that a few more times to destroy all the Humvees, and then the KPA retreats. But a jet flies overhead and bombs the streets. Between missions, we hear a pirate radio broadcast from the Voice of Freedom explaining to the nation what just happened.
KPA authorities raided the town of Montrose, Colorado. Their goal, in the words of the enemy, was to neutralize high-value citizen targets. But this was not a measured response to American insurgency. This was innocent blood running red on Main Street. Your families and friends shot down like animals. One of the Montrose resistance cells reportedly escaped after a brutal firefight in a nearby neighborhood. We can only hope that these freedom fighters made it to one of their safe zones somewhere in a sea of abandoned suburbs. But whatever their fate, we will fight on. Don't believe the lies of the Korean-controlled media. We are the channel of truth, and this is the Voice of Freedom.
Then we wake up in a bunk bed in the resistance settlement. Boone shows us around the settlement, and we see that they've created their own little safe haven that apparently the KPA can't find from above. They've called this the Oasis. On a wall in one of the back rooms, there's a QR code. I tried to scan it, but it didn't do anything. It turns out that these were part of a transmedia marketing campaign. There are several of these QR codes throughout the game, and scanning them takes you to a website to download wallpapers and had a video explaining the Asian bird flu pandemic. Unfortunately, the websites for these are all long gone. It's really funny looking back on these now because back in 2011, QR codes were just starting to pop up. And if you think about it, not many people even had smartphones in 2011, let alone an app to scan QR codes. It's not like today where everyone has a smartphone and every phone's native camera app is all you need to scan a QR code, and QR codes are ubiquitous. Browsing GameFAQs, you can still find comments from people asking what the hell these black squares are. Boone shows off the rest of the Oasis, and we see some creepy ass children playing. There's just something off about the scaling on this kid. We exit the settlement through a tunnel on our way to a local school to collect a delivery of mortar rounds for the planned raid for the night. We meet up with Hopper and we make our way through a house. Is this joke getting old yet? Cause we're just getting started. A sentry gun is guarding the road. We gotta sneak past it and throw a grenade behind it to blow it up. Boone leads the way as we run to cover. So we make our way to the backside of it and we blow it up with a grenade. Then we head through another house. The KPA come after us, so we wipe them out and then we head through the door. We make our way to the school and discover that instead of mortar rounds, Connor secured white phosphorus rounds. And they're definitely gonna regret inviting a comparison to Spec Ops: The Line. We also discover Boone took a bullet from the sentry gun that was outside while crossing over to cover. Rihanna takes Boone back to the settlement, but first he hands Connor his badge and we're sent to find our contact at the labor camp. We make our way through the school and we find this wall full of guns.
Time to make all those popular kids pay for ignoring me.
Then we're out in the streets fighting the KPA, but there's a sentry turret blocking our way.
This way! There's an alley behind this house! We can get around through the backyard! Second floor window!
Then we make our way upstairs inside to flank the sentry turret and destroy it with another grenade. Then we make our way to another tunnel that leads into the camp.
Let's ditch the rifles. We need to keep a low profile.
We start asking around the camp so we can find this guy named Arnie, and there's another QR code on this wall of missing persons.
What do you want?
You know, you should desolder the capacitors first.
Isn't it bad enough I gotta scrape these for my food rations?
Sorry, I'm only trying to help.
Welcome to the Korean vision of America, Jacobs. That look like recovery to you? I'm looking for a guy named Arnie.
Fuck you. Never heard of him.
Cut the shit. Show him this, tell him Boone sent us.
Hey, Connor, relax. Where's Boone? And who's the new guy?
Plan changed.
So we meet up with Arnie, and he's going to take us to the tracking devices we need.
Don't worry about it. I took care of it. It's what an inside man's for, right?
But first, we gotta wait for everyone to go through the fucking turnstile. And once we're through,
Nobody move!
It's a trap!
then suddenly it goes slow-mo and the three of us kill off Arnie and 4 guards before any of them can pull a trigger. I wonder where they got the inspiration for this. After fighting through the KPA forces, we find the beacons, then head to cut through the baseball fields to catch up to the fuel tankers and attach the trackers. Connor finally tells us that our part in all of this is to pilot a helicopter to chase down the fuel tankers after they leave. As we make our way into the baseball fields, we discover that the KPA are dumping bodies into mass graves.
Thrown into a pit like garbage. How many people are in this ditch? You sons of bitches. Scumbag motherfuckers.
You motherfuckers! You think you can just throw us in a goddamn ditch?
Sentries! Stay behind the bleachers!
Country!
Connor's lost
Kill
it,
our
man. We gotta
families!
take out those sentries!
I'll burn you, you sons of bitches!
Connor loses his shit and goes on a rampage. Then we make our way around the baseball field to destroy the sentry guns. And while investigating the mass graves, a KPA helicopter shows up. Connor orders us to climb into the mass grave to hide. This scene is so disgusting, and I feel like it's actually pretty gripping. So far, this game is just really hitting home when I think that these are American citizens that these atrocities are being committed against. They really made me feel angry and want to take down the KPA. It does a slightly better job of this than any other military shooters at the time. The KPA shows up and figures we're hiding in the grave, so they shoot indiscriminately, but somehow they don't hit any of us.
Hugging it.
These photos came to me by way of a friend with contacts deep in the resistance. I think we all suspected. No, we knew that atrocities like this were happening, but the proof is so horrifying it's almost surreal. We should be thankful for this evidence. It reveals an enemy that wants to dehumanize us. By pushing American corpses into an unmarked ditch can't bury our defiance. If dirt and gravel fill silent mouths, we'll speak for them and tell their stories to the world. The dead have names as long as we fight in their memory. This land will be our land again. Even now, the resistance is planning attacks that could lead to victory in one of our greatest cities. This is the Voice of Freedom signing off.
So now we're headed off on a nighttime raid mission. The plan is for us to get set up with a sniper on Overwatch while Hopper sets up the mortar on a flank and Connor crashes the main gate. We're told not to open fire until Connor gives the signal. So we head up to the roof and Rihanna stealth kills this guy. Then we make our way into position on the roof. The van crashes the gate, and as the soldiers investigate, Hopper lights them up with the white phosphorus mortar. Hopper is supposed to fire a second round, but it jams. So Connor gives us the order and we start shooting. Then the mortar misfires and it flies right at us. And even though it explodes right over our head, it doesn't set us alight, and instead we just fall from the roof. So we get up and we make our way across the lot as burning enemies and allies come walking out of the blaze. And I did not add in that Wilhelm scream. That is actually in the game. I'm not even kidding. After regrouping with Connor in the tower, a helicopter shows up and blows up the tower, and we fall again. Goliath then shows up, and the enemy has some EMP rocket launchers that are on the roof that we have to take out to defend it. Also, you might notice that the sign on the store says TigerDirect.com, a now defunct computer hardware retailer. In the game's trailers, we can see that this was originally supposed to be lumber liquidators, but I have a feeling that they didn't like what was going to happen to their store. Using Goliath, we target the helicopter and shoot it out of the sky. It ends up crashing into the Tiger Direct store, so we follow Goliath and... Those are words I never expected to hear in a first-person shooter. After killing the enemies in the Hooters, we make our way to the back of the store, passing a NOS energy vending machine. We fight through the store until we reach this door that's at the top of this ramp. Then Rihanna yells out that we need to meet at the top of the ramp, and we have to wait for them to kick down another door.
The vehicle depot's on the other side of this door. We'll create a diversion. You have to tag one of the tankers before it leaves the lot. We can't fuck this up. Go, go, go!
On the other side of the door are the tankers, but they are already moving, so we haul ass to reach them to place the tracker. And we run and barely reach the last one to plant the tracker. I then ended up turning around and running back the way I came, which was the wrong direction. And the whole time, Rihanna and Connor are just chattering.
Jacob, meet us at the back of the store. Finish him off, Jacob!
Flank these assholes. We're moving out. Mop up the stragglers. Meet up by the rear exit.
Over here, by the doors.
And this shit is constant throughout the game. I don't know who it was on the Kaos team that decided the AI needs to chatter so frequently, but they deserve to be part of the team that got let go. We finally meet up with them at the door, and we wait for one of them to kick the door open.
Let's move!
And as we make our way through the store, the blaze spreads.
I thought I smelled Korean barbecue.
Okay, so I know Connor is supposed to be the over-the-top asshole of the group, but that line is just fucking ridiculous. Maybe Rihanna is supposed to make us feel the weight of the situation and how a normal person would feel, but that doesn't work. This is one of the instances where it just feels like the game devs are trying to tell us how to feel.
Oh my god! We're having a fire sale!
Out on the roof, we take out the enemies in the lot, then we jump from the roof and we survive another fall. Then we sprint to catch up with the truck and make our escape. And as we're leaving, we can use Goliath to take out the KPA Humvees that are pursuing us.
We've confirmed news of a daring attack today against the primary KPA supply depot in Montreux. Although the resistance suffered heavy losses, the mission was called a success. The courage and sacrifice of these men and women won't be forgotten, but our enemies have also marked this day. Throughout the occupation zone, the KPA has increased security and pressured civilians to identify resistance members. Citizens have disappeared in alarming numbers with reports of torture and execution. Unquestion the risks of rebellion. They fear reprisal, the boot to the door in the middle of the night. The price of our liberty has always been high. We must stand together now or not at all. This is the voice of freedom.
When we get back to the settlement, we find out that the KPA found the oasis and they killed everyone. It's kind of tragic seeing these people with bags over their heads and Boone hanging from a kid's swing set. We head through the nearby town and oh shit. See, it's stuff like this that makes this game something special. No one calls attention to it. It's just set dressing. Makes me feel something that I don't think I've ever experienced in Call of Duty. I feel personally invested in defeating the KPA. As we head out into the street, we get caught in an ambush. Then Goliath shows up and we protect it from the RPG troops on the rooftops as we head down the street, and then a tank rolls in. So we head down a back path to try to flank it and get a better shot for Goliath to take it out. Goliath is pretty messed up from that action, so Connor says to leave it behind, but Hopper and Rihanna hop on to fix it. Connor shouts that we don't have time to wait, but then Hopper gets it fixed enough and Connor says,
"Good, we're gonna need it. Let's go."
Yeah, this is peak character writing. Then as we move on, oh God. Even the water tower has bodies hanging from it. We make our way to a spot that overlooks the suburbs, and we see the KPA indiscriminately firing at all the civilians and carpet bombing the homes. And it's all payback for last night's raid. We catch up with the rest of the resistance and we fight through the town toward the wall that the KPA has set up around the town. The plan is to strap C4 to Goliath and let it drive up and blow open the wall. Fighting through the White Castle, we make our way to a door that we actually get to kick open for ourselves for once. And when we do, we get a second awkward slow-mo section. And this is just not as cool as the developers thought it would be. As Goliath reaches the gate, we fire a rocket at it to blow open the wall, and we make our way out of Montrose. We hop into a Humvee and we get a very uncomfortable turret section. The Humvee is bobbing all around, so it's tough to aim at anything, and it doesn't help that the graphics engine and the frame rate are struggling like all hell on the Xbox 360 during this section. I'm pretty sure I didn't even kill the enemies that I needed to. I don't know if you can even fail this mission. We make our way out to the countryside in search of the helicopter that's needed to chase down the fuel tankers.
The Resistance has attempted to contact cells beyond the Montrose area. It's hard to determine what's happening outside the wall, but our KPA sources report that several patrols have gone missing, and the ones that survive have nothing but horror stories. After the EMP went off, and the electronic grid that sustained us broke apart, our nation fell into a kind of a madness. I remember that first winter. Desperation sweeping the country. People turned on each other, and worse, as food grew scarce. Many beyond the wall have no allegiance to any cause other than their own survival. If we must deal with them, be advised they can be unpredictable, and a fair number outright insane. Let's be careful out there. This is the voice of freedom.
So we meet up with the leader of the survivalists group, but since Boone isn't with us, he calls off the deal and we start killing them. Then Connor hands us a silent sniper and we get a bootleg ghillied up. And this mission sucks. As we sneak through, Connor will call out guards for you to shoot, and you have to wait for the signal. Even though you know you have to shoot the guy and he's up on a tower and he says to take care of him, you gotta wait for the little indicator to change. I didn't this time, and I failed and had to restart the whole mission. The whole sneaking section takes about 9 minutes, with most of it just waiting. The most interesting about this section is seeing all the horrible things this group does to the captured KPA soldiers. These two guys shoot at the feet of this KPA soldier and toy with him before killing him. These two soldiers are forced to spin this wheel to charge the batteries for the camp. One of the guards says he'll cut the skin from their backs if the batteries aren't charged. These guys are forcing this soldier to dig his own grave before they eventually kill him. Oh, and I encountered a visual bug in this section where the lighting is all blocky. Eventually, we get past the stealth section and run under this bridge when the survivalists throw some KPA soldiers off to hang. We fight through the survivalist camp and we find another KPA is on a spinning throwing knife practice board thing. I ended up just shooting this guy to put him out of his misery. Then we head up into a church tower to provide cover for Connor and Rihanna to steal the helicopter. But first we have to wait for Connor's signal to take out the patrolling guards one by one.
Drop him. One more. Take him out. Okay.
As they reach the helicopter, an enemy picks up an RPG and fires it at the church, so we fall again. Then we reach the helicopter and we can't get in because we have to fucking wait for them to get in first.
Under heavy fire! Cover me!
This message is to all cells in Utah and Nevada. Korean tankers carrying jet fuel are nearing the Lake Tahoe area. Resistance operations are underway to intercept. Our soldiers need any and all resources we can provide to help them defeat the occupation. Use these encoded radio channels to communicate. I will, as always, be here as your conduit. This is the voice of freedom.
This mission is flying the helicopter to chase down the tankers. You've played this mission in about a dozen different games at this point. At least in this one, you get to control the chopper, so it's not just an on-rails section. You catch up to the tankers, the team hops out to hijack them, then you destroy a bunch of vehicles that are blocking the path, then you escort the tankers to a bridge, but Connor's truck stalls out. You're supposed to defend it from enemy attacks while they get it started up and while Hopper plants C4 to blow the bridge behind them. What's really annoying is you're gated by invisible walls everywhere and you can't fly off to get closer to the enemies. But it doesn't matter, it's laughably easy. The enemies never got anywhere near the tankers. So the team blows up the bridge to prevent the KPA from following us, and the tankers make their escape as we head to deliver the fuel to the US military in San Francisco.
Once upon a time in America, our military was a well-oiled, well-funded machine capable of projecting massive power anywhere in the world. The crumbling of our nation, finished with the hammer blows of a cunning enemy, changed all that. But this country's strength has never been solely weighed by its guns and treasure. 250 years ago, farmers and shopkeepers, printers and blacksmiths fought a mighty empire, armed with little more than courage and a dream of freedom. Today, a new generation of civilians will join our armed forces to tear San Francisco from enemy hands. I am the voice of freedom, but you are its terrible, swift sword. This is a war of the people, by the people. Let freedom reign.
Then we join up with the military and we supply them with the fuel for their jets, and we can now begin our assault on the Golden Gate Bridge. And why do we care about the Golden Gate Bridge? Is this really some strategically important objective for the war against the KPA? This bridge that's, a couple of miles inland? Some jets come flying by and blow up some of the choppers. And wait, I know those jets. Those models are taken straight out of Frontlines. See? As we reach the Golden Gate Bridge, we use our grenade launcher attachment to kill the enemies. They used it again. And again. We get set down and we make our way to climb up onto the bridge, but first we have to deal with this tank. Then we wait for Connor to kick open another door. And we can climb up to the bridge. As we reach the top, we've got a flanking position on the enemy, so we shoot them down. Then we meet up with the convoy to push across the bridge. Some sentry towers block our path, and as we look for a way around them, a chopper shows up and fires a rocket that makes us fall from the bridge and onto the walkways beneath. Rihanna and Connors call out to us, but since we're a silent protagonist, we don't radio back to them. So we fight through the underdeck until we can find a ladder to climb up and out. It brings us right behind the sentry towers, and we take them out so our squad can advance.
Jacobs! That's like the fifth thing you've fallen off of and lived.
Just because you call attention to it doesn't excuse the fact that you use the same falling off of something trope 5 fucking times. The helicopter shows back up, so we pick up a javelin and we take it down. Then we open the gate, and our objective is to take down the AA guns that are shredding our air support. So we fight through to the AA guns, and as we take the platform, we have to defend against the waves of enemies that are coming right at us.
My God, it's coming right for us!
I tried to use the sniper, but all the shake from the explosions makes it impossible to aim. Hopper hacks a KPA laptop, and we can use it to call in a UCAV, which is basically just the AC-130 section from Call of Duty. After the enemy convoy is destroyed, we take control of the Humvee. So yeah, we have another awful Humvee scene. And just look at how bad the frame rate and the graphics are. Just look at all the cones fading in. It's no wonder people didn't like this game when it came out. We destroy an enemy Humvee in front of the gate, and a KPA Goliath comes out and chases us down. And as it chases after it, we shoot at it a bunch. It shoots rockets at us, and we have some countermeasure flares that we can launch. I tried to find a clip of me using them on screen so you could see what they look like, but apparently they aren't visible on screen when you use them. After a little while, it crashes in front of a fuel tanker, and you shoot the fuel tanker to make it explode and destroy the Goliath. The blast sends the Humvee flying, and we wake up to Connor calling for an airstrike on the column of enemy armor approaching. Warpath says negative because they can't get a read on who is friendly and who's hostile. So Connor picks up a flare and runs at the enemy tanks. And somehow they don't shoot him before he reaches them. Then the jets, which again are from Frontlines, and also they're not controllable in Homefront at all, not even in the multiplayer. They bomb the tanks, destroying them. Connor is killed in the blast, I guess, and the camera pans out and the music swells. Then we get a British news broadcast.
This is Europa News in London. The Underground Voice of Freedom Network reports that American resistance fighters have joined U.S. military forces in a major offensive in occupied San Francisco at the Golden Gate Bridge. The coordinated attack may prove to be a turning point in America's guerrilla war against the Korean occupation. Meanwhile, the EU Defense Council has called an emergency session to plan support for our allies across the Atlantic.
And then it just ends. It just fucking ends right there. Are you serious? With all that buildup, all that marketing, and all that development of the setting and the story, and that's all you have to show for it. So that was everyone's experience with Homefront's story campaign. I think it's safe to say it did not go over well. It clearly had some divisive themes and presentation. Some people might like the setting, some might hate it. Even if you did really enjoy the setting, it fails to deliver and it ends incredibly abruptly. It sets up this whole plot to fight back against the KPA, but it ends on a cliffhanger, and it's not even clear if we were victorious or what victory really means for us. But the really damning thing is best said by Angry Joe.
The game is all of 4 hours. 4 hours again.
And that's the real problem right there. It's trying to fit so many things into such a small package that it fails to deliver on most of what it sets out to do. The opening scene sets up this crazy world where the KPA is herding Americans like cattle, and it pulls on your heartstrings by being so over the top and shocking, but it just keeps trying to one-up the shock factor without ever giving a solid foundation to build on. Outside of seeing the labor camp that we sneak into and the civilians in the neighborhoods, we don't get to know the world very much. From the very moment we get to control Jacobs, we know that we have plot armor and we're the action hero that's going to save the day, but they failed to deliver on that too. We don't even know if we saved the day. We don't even know if we won at the Golden Gate Bridge or what that means to win at the Golden Gate Bridge. And that means we're left with nothing but disappointment.
So our main design goal for Homefront multiplayer is to create the most intense, exciting, large-scale warfare experience on the consoles.
So with that 4-hour experience out of the way and the bad taste in your mouth, the only thing left to do is go try out the multiplayer. And you'd find a very familiar multiplayer offering with some unique elements thrown into it. Following up on their experience with large-scale vehicle-based multiplayer shooters, Kaos merged their brand of combat with the loadout and level systems that players had become accustomed to. Homefront supported up to 32 players per lobby with dedicated servers on console, something that was rarely seen at the time. Battlefield Bad Company offered it too, but it was on a much smaller scale battlefield, ironically. There was also this game called MAG, Massive Action Game, on the PlayStation 3, and it supported 256 players. In Homefront, players could also take control of aerial and ground-based vehicles, and you could deploy drones, a carryover from Frontlines. Rather than copying Call of Duty's killstreak system or spawning vehicles at designated places like Frontlines did or Battlefield before it, Homefront had an innovative battle points system. Players earned points for kills, assists, and completing objectives, and you could spend those points during the match to unlock vehicles, drones, ammo restocks, special weapons, and even different airstrikes. This is a very similar system to what's found over in Counter-Strike, but what separates Homefront is the ability to spend your points while you're still alive on the battlefield, rather than needing to wait until your next death. The only exception to this was purchasing vehicles. Kaos Studios thought it would be better balancing if you had to wait until after you died to be able to purchase a vehicle. After missions, you would earn experience and you would level up, and you would unlock new loadouts, guns, attachment options, and special abilities. Each loadout had the traditional main weapon, sidearm, and grenade slots, but also there were these 2 purchase slots for players to choose what they could spend their battle points on while in-game, and there was also a perk system. Here you get 4 ability points that can be allocated across the perks that cost between 1 and 3 ability points. Overall, the reception to the multiplayer was pretty positive, with many praising the game's large-scale warfare, drones, vehicles, and the battle point system. The main mode, ground control, was a hit, giving that sense of being part of a massive ongoing war. But ultimately, sentiment didn't last long, as Homefront would suffer from server stability issues at launch and a rapidly dwindling player base as balance issues persisted.
Waiting forever in in-game lobby. I can't play online. Back to Battlefield.
Unfortunately, neither the initially intriguing single-player campaign nor the ambitious multiplayer offering were able to live up to the hype. Player expectations were through the roof, fueled by that massive marketing campaign promising a groundbreaking experience. GameSpot, IGN, and Game Informer all gave Homefront a 7 out of 10. And if you know anything about the major gaming outlets, a 7 means almost nothing. What they were really trying to tell you with that meme score is that Homefront was just okay. It mostly just fell short of what it set out to do. The review score that mattered the most to me at the time came from Angry Joe, who gave it a 6 out of 10, and maybe that's why I never played it when it came out. While initial sales were impressive, with 1 million copies sold in the first week, word of mouth about Homefront wasn't great. Sales very quickly slowed down as people shifted back to playing other games. In total, THQ reported about 2.6 million copies were sold, with about 70% of those on Xbox 360, 25% over on the PlayStation 3, and the remaining 5% on PC. We often will hear how many copies a game sold, and in our minds we'll jump to multiplying that number by $60 or $70 today, damn. But if you know anything about economics, that's just foolish. First, publishers earn their revenue when they sell the game to a retailer. The retailer then turns around and sells the game to a customer at full price. For the retailer to make profit, they have to buy the game at a lower cost, usually around $30 or $35. And also, if retailers can't get customers to buy the games, their contracts often allow them to return inventory back to the publisher. So really, Homefront probably sold somewhere around 2.2 million copies at around $30 a pop for THQ. And that means that they only earned a whopping $66 million. And that barely covers the $50 million marketing budget. And once you factor in all of the development costs for a 2-year project, I'm pretty sure that the only profit that they made, if they made any, was from the product placement. Homefront's disappointing performance led to THQ closing Kaos Studios on June 13th of 2011, only 3 months after Homefront's release. And before the corpse was even cold, THQ announced that a sequel was on the way. Support for the Homefront IP was being handed over to THQ's Montreal studio. After throwing everything that they had at Homefront, THQ really was in crisis mode. And it didn't help that at the same time, they were throwing away all of their money on another terrible, terrible investment.
Set your imagination free. Enjoy a wide variety of games. And bring the entire family together with a game of Pictionary.
This is the U-Draw tablet. This failed disaster of a product is what ultimately brought down one of the most beloved publishers in the history of gaming. The U-Draw tablet was designed as a way to draw on the screen. It's basically a Mario Paint tablet without the awesome Fly Swatter game. THQ developed this thing and released it in November of 2010 for the Wii, a fitting platform for the target audience. It was a moderate success. Then some moron thought that it should be also made for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, where it was released on November of 2011. And no one bought this thing. THQ priced it at $70, and THQ ended up being stuck with 1.4 million unsold units. They incurred a loss of around $100 million on the manufacturing and inventory alone. And as I was doing the research for this section, I just kept finding more relevant facts, and so here you go. THQ actually stands for Toy Headquarters. I didn't know that. And they were initially a toy company that pivoted to video games. THQ was founded by Jack Friedman, who was also the founder of another toy company that turned into a video game publisher. That company went by the name of LJN. Yeah, the same LJN that made the games that are often featured in videos by the angry video game nerd.
You take one look at that logo and you just know there is no gold at the end of that rainbow, because this, my friends, is the unholy stamp of death.
In 1987, 33 years before the U-Draw tablet, LJN released the LJN Video Art.
Video Art!
A digital art game console that was a commercial failure.
Video Art!
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
THQ's game releases for the rest of 2011 and 2012 couldn't offset the massive losses that they had taken from the U-Draw tablet. All of their games saw the same fate, performing pretty well, but not selling enough copies to dig themselves out of their hole. In July of 2012, the shareholders would agree to a last-ditch effort and approve a 1-for-10 reverse stock split, cutting the number of available shares to 1/10 the previous amount. all so that they could keep the price per share above $1 and prevent it from being delisted from the stock exchange. But despite these last-ditch efforts, as the year came to an end, THQ's balance sheet showed nearly $250 million in debt to only $204 million in assets. So on March 19th of 2012, THQ filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and eventually the presiding judge would deny their first attempt to sell to a private capital group, instead allowing more time for other companies to bid for their assets and IP. THQ's assets and IPs were divided up and sold off to the highest bidder. Sega purchased Relic Entertainment, who would eventually deliver a terrible Company of Heroes 3. Koch Media bought Volition and the Metro franchise. One of those turned into an amazing series, and the other turned into a flaming pile of who the fuck was this made for? The Darksiders series survived after some convoluted moves between development studios, and on January 23rd of 2013, we learned that THQ Montreal was acquired by Ubisoft, and thankfully, South Park: The Stick of Truth was saved. And last but not least, Homefront, the new IP with tons of promise that failed to live up to expectations, was sold to Crytek for $500,000. And just like that, in what felt like the blink of an eye to gamers everywhere, THQ was gone. The THQ branding and many of their assets were later acquired by Austrian publisher Nordic Games. And in 2016, Nordic Games rebranded themselves as THQ Nordic. And they are sort of continuing on with that legacy of releasing great games across many IPs, like Darksiders 3, Red Faction Guerrilla Remastered Edition, which is just difficult to say aloud, Destroy All Humans, and Titan Quest. I really hope that they've learned from the original THQ's mistakes, but looking at their Wikipedia page and the number of acquisitions that they've been making, and with them being owned by the Embracer Group, I'm not holding my breath. Who would have thought that I would go down such a rabbit hole and learn so much about the industry from playing Homefront, a 4-hour flawed Call of Duty clone from 2011. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did. Well, I enjoyed the beginning of the game. After I was done with it, I was just left with disappointment. Really just discovering all of this about THQ was just mind-opening for me. There's just so much there that I just wasn't aware of. It's unbelievable to me to think that a publisher that was that big with games that were seen as hits like SpongeBob, Battle for Bikini Bottom, and all those MX versus ATV releases, how they could just ride straight off the rails so quickly. Homefront is just a great example of how over-ambition can be such a massive pitfall for the games industry. I mean, look at Concord. But it's a story we hear all the time. They take a team that has very little experience, give them an insurmountable task, and then you bet everything on them needing to succeed. And eventually, when it doesn't succeed, you just close the studio. It's a cautionary tale that should be a lesson to the industry, but if there's one thing we know, it's that executives don't learn from their mistakes. In May of 2016, a sequel, Homefront: The Revolution, was released by Dambuster Studios, with Deep Silver publishing the title. Though Crytek had purchased the rights to Homefront from THQ and began the initial development on the game, both Crytek and their parent company, Koch Media, would face financial troubles, leading to the IP changing hands again. The game took the familiar backstory, changed the location to Philadelphia, and infused open-world elements similar to the Far Cry series. It too was met with average reviews. I recently picked it up on Steam in the hopes of finally giving it a shot. The changes to the formula seem rather interesting to me. If I do end up playing it, I'll definitely be making a video to cover it too. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button to get recommended more videos like this one. And speaking of, here's a link to another video that you can watch right now.